When you write, are you looking for the complexity of the image, or are you starting with the theme and trying to express, you know?
So everything for me starts with the image and sound, in fact.
I mean, I knew that. I've seen your film, I could tell.
Hi, RaMell. I'm Coralie Fargeat.
Hello, Coralie. My name is RaMell. Nice to meet you.
So nice to meet you.
Yeah.
So nice to meet you.
Where are you from?
So I'm from Pérez. I was born and grew up there. And yeah, that's where I spent my whole life, except from traveling.
Yeah.
And where are you from?
I was born in Frankfurt, Germany.
Oh, okay.
But raised in Northern Virginia. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not the most creative, I guess, community. Like the suburbs of America are fairly cookie cutter. I mean, there's creativity there, but what about you? Did you grow up in like a creative household or?
Yeah, I think from a very young age, like my grandfather was the kind of the artist brain of the family. He was a bit like unconventional, so he wasn't doing things like everyone. I spent a lot of time with him, so I guess that's in the first place what brought me into looking the world into a specific lens.
Did you have access to cameras? Did you like make films early or?
So when I was a kid, no, but I think the first thing that I started doing when I was a kid was like to do little plays with my friends for my family. I think when I was maybe 7 or 8, my mother told me, okay, do you want me to put you into a dance class or into a theater class? And immediately I said, oh my God, theater class. And I remember that the first little play that we did for the end of the year show was like Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah.
And I got to play the crazy cat. And
did you choose that role or were you?
Not really. And so like the teacher said, okay, so you're going to play the cat. And so I ended up with a kind of ridiculous pajamas, and with this kind of makeup. And I think it's shaped from a very early age, my relationship to, yes, what you get to do when you're not doing the princess stuff or the one that is the pretty girl. And, that was a dream, I think, for every little kid. But this theater class was the very first one, even before I got to go to the movies and discover Star Wars, which was my first, I think, big shock.
Yeah.
As a kid, was there a specific moment or a specific turning point or?
Well, I think it's hard. I feel like it's super fluid with my life. So both my parents were military. And so my household wasn't disciplined as you would think as if someone was a drill sergeant, but I played sports. I didn't really drink and smoke and practiced all the time, got scholarship for basketball. And then I stopped playing because I got injured. And around that time, my mom passed away. And then finding photography at the same time.
So your first tool of expression was a camera, like a to do photography?
Yeah, I would say genuinely basketball, because I believe so deeply that the camera is very similar to the way that athletes deal with space and time and perception and movement. Yeah, and then that kind of became it. Did you start writing first, you said?
At first, I hated writing. I was, the thing that I was so bad with words. I did many mistakes, and that was the thing that I felt I was so bad with. The very first thing I felt at ease with was images, creating images. And that's also where I felt like I was at my place, because I was at school. I was doing good, but the thing I hated was the language. It was the French language. It was not my place. So that's so funny that now that I'm writing scripts.
But when you're thinking about your creative process, are you looking for the complexity of the image? And this is kind of a loaded question, or are you starting with the theme and trying to express, in that relationship?
So everything for me starts with the image and sound, in fact.
I mean, I knew that. I've seen your film, I could tell.
So in fact, when I start to have an idea, the first thing I do is researching images, sound. I listen to a lot of music, to find the creative world of the film, which is through visual and through sound. And I start to write a few scenes that come, and these are the one that comes almost with no words. For this one, for the substance, the first scene I started to write, even before I knew who my character would be or what my story would be, with the birth sequence, when she looks at herself in the mirror and Sue is born from her.
Yeah.
And this one came in such because I was writing what I was seeing and what I was, I like what you said about sport and rhythm and anticipation. I had never thought about that, but now that you say it, it's like, and to me, framing and building a scene with no words, it's everything about the pacing, the rhythm, the framing, what you show, what you don't show. Also, how you create suspense or what you're expecting. A little bit as you saying about the suspense about is it gonna go in. So I don't know how it is for you, your writing process, because also your film was so visually and soundly powerful, and for me it felt driven by that a lot. So I'd be super interested of knowing how it takes shapes for you.
Very similarly, and I think, making a film very much like our films, in which they are, I think, leading with the image.
Yeah.
For me, it's very important for a person to encounter the image like they're walking around a corner and they just don't know what's going to be next. And so they're constantly in a relationship to the awe that is what happens when we're looking in the real world, what it is to be a person in weather, the type of sensorial things that we all know so well. That's kind of what I want to do inside our ideas. Coralie, The Substance, how did it come about? Because it's a wild film. I wasn't ready for it.
It really came from a necessity to let it out in a very violent way, everything that I had inside regarding those themes. My first feature film, Revenge, was considered as a feminist film, which it is, but I wasn't aware of it when I wrote it. I did it in an unconscious way, which I needed to express at the time. And when it was released, it happened with the Weinstein thing. So then everybody was telling me about feminism and everything. And I discovered, about it in a more rational and intellectual way. And from this point, I started to read a lot and be more and more interested in a more active way about all those issues and about how everything you discover about all the inequalities that are still in the world, all the systemic things that kind of unbalance our relationship to society. And from then, I felt like everything that I had lived into from my life, from the very kid, I was till now, about how I felt that I had to bother about my body, how my body was going to be judged, how my appearance was going to be judged, what it was to be considered a good little girl or a good woman or a sexy or, all this I realized had such a massive impact on my life and had led to, I would say, generate a lot of self-hatred and a lot of violence towards myself, that I felt I needed to blow this out. I needed to have a big explosion of everything that I felt that I had to keep inside, because it was not supposed to be, shown, or it was not supposed to be delicate, or it was not supposed to be what a girl would do. I needed to spray it all over and then, kind of try and break something. So it really also met the moment where I had passed my 40s and I was going toward my 50s, and I really started to have those crazy thoughts about, okay, now my life is over. It's going to be the end. I'm not going to be of any interest for anyone, and I felt, wow, my God, this is so crazy. And if I don't do something with that now, I think all this can really crush me and can really like put me down. So it was really a kind of a necessity scream that I wanted to break free from all these injunctions that I think I personally, and I think every woman for that instance, have been living with. And so that's really where it started. And it's also linked to my love for genre films because, you know, they're out of reality, they're out of the real world. And I felt that this is where I feel good. So I don't know how it happened for you, like the what brought you to want to tell that story.
Yeah. Well, I know not to keep talking about the substance, but real quick question: what do you think about in terms of like your younger self? If you know you're watching this film when you're 10, or there is someone that's when you're 10, it's a different time than when someone's 10 now. So I guess maybe both. Like, how do you imagine their encounter with your work is?
I would say, I guess, if I was seeing my movie now, I think it would definitely open some creative space for me, which is what I loved when I discovered other filmmakers' work when I was younger, which were very creative. It's a little bit, as you were saying, like there is what you see, and as you said, it's very specific. But in the film, I tried to have a whole unconscious space, an unconscious world where everyone can put its own, projection. That's what I love with the locations, with having those powerful, colorful locations, with those wide angles. I think it gives you a powerful feeling about those places, but it doesn't tell you what you should feel.
Yeah.
It tells you, of course, it guides you somewhere, but everyone then can, I think, put its own mind and its own fears and its own fantasy inside those places. And that's what I loved when I discovered films of filmmakers that open their creative mind on the screen, such as Kubrick or Cronenberg or David Lynch, where there is what you see and there is a whole other dark world that you don't see that has fed what is on screen.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk to the visceral. I wanted to talk, to the also triggers other people's creativity. And hopefully, I think that's what it would have been if I had watched that movie when I would be 12.
Yeah. I think if I were to watch your film when I was younger, I would have a deeply visceral understanding of what it would be like for my sister to be in the world. I think she was always, and I speak for her, though I shouldn't, straddling like the Black community and the white community and, those things that are racialized in the US. And that was a sort of additional burden to just being a woman and having to deal with, Western beauty standards.
Yeah.
And I know for a fact that there's like just self-loathing that is built into the way that people make people feel, and you're just always sort of questioning your body. And I wonder like how that would have changed my understanding of like what I'm complicit in, the structure that I'm kind of naturally perpetuating by being a male and being able to be free and think without the sort of consequences that a woman has. It's a strange thing. It's like Joe Mofrey, who's the DP on Nickel Boys, always talks about just sometimes being in the spaces that we are and sharing the ideas in spaces like this are speaking to the younger versions of us that didn't have people doing that thing, which is quite simple, but it's just very true. And I think for Nickel Boys, it's one thing to think about violence in those terms, because the violence in your film, which is explicit, points to the hidden violence. And I think in my film, the violence that is not explicit points to the traditionally explicit violence. And so there's some weird inverse between our films in the way in which it deals with the visible and the invisible. I know that we very consciously decided to not indulge in our script, we were like, you won't see one punch in the boxing scene. Like you won't see anyone ever touch anyone in a way that, is violent, for reasons that I think everyone knows. The indulgence of culture with the visualization of Black suffering, it's just something that's sort of built into the way in which the continent of Africa has been, shared across continents. but specifically in the Black community in the US, it's a wild thing to think that the majority of stories are struggle narratives. And when someone needs to connect emotionally with what a character is going through, we just show it. And it's fine because people need to see, like, the camera has been one of the greatest companions to empathy, you know, across time. We would not know what suffering people had been going through. But also, like, with, you know, I apologize for calling you a white woman, but for white women, like, the amount of white women having things happen to them in cinema violently in horror films is, like, mind-boggling. Like, it produces that vision in the real world. You go out in the street and you imagine a horror scene, you know? Yeah. And that happens with people of color, that happens with white women, that happens with everyone, but there are certain archetypes that are intensified, that intensify that relationship in the real world. It's a really strange thing. It brings me to the sort of point of view conversation in which our film we called Sentient Perspective, to kind of like get to something more soulful with the camera. But I think in your film, it's like very clearly authored by a person's point of view. Like, you're essentially, I wanted to ask how personal the film was, but you just answered it, you know? It is basically you know, unloading all of the residue of whatever attritions happen to you over time, psychically. But I wonder, when you think about like that extreme close-up of like the shrimp, and like when you're thinking about point of view with the camera, is that literally how you see it? Or are you kind of trying to, like, you know, do what cinema does, is like emphasize, I guess?
I think it's both. I think there is, as you said, there is part of it that is really creating an immersive experience for the audience, to try and make them feel what I feel or what I want them to feel at that moment. And as I don't do it through dialogues, I really do it by, in the framings and in the relationship with sound, creating whatever the scene for me is about. And for instance, it's true that the shrimp scenes, it's like portraying the violence of that guy, the way he kind of crushes her, and represented it in a symbolic way with the way he crushes the shrimps, and the way also he takes all the space. Like, you know, we created a lot of extra sound from him in Foley, like his elbows on the table. And so he takes the space in a visual way, in a sound way. And I love to put the symbols for real, like to have him being disgusting and having been violent, and rather than do it only with words or too much with words, doing it in a visual that makes you feel it yourself, as it was like eating you up and digesting you and chewing, you know, you up after crushing you. Yeah. And then there is all the POVs. I'm thinking most importantly of the birth scene. That is one where it was for me one of the turning point where it's something like totally crazy that happens, and that the audience has to enter it and not like say, oh, this couldn't exist, like I'm not into the film. So for me, it's trying to make it as visceral and as immersive as possible. At first, by having the audience feel what Elizabeth is feeling, like building the expectation of what is going to happen. We feel that something's happened, she screams, but we don't see anything yet. And then having those close-up on her eyes while we hear something and she can't move, but we kind of feel through her eye everything that, you know, happening. And all this leads to like the birth of Sue through the tunnel of light as well, where there is this kind of transfer of consciousness, and make it the birth then when Sue awakes, a totally POV shot, in a sequence that she was really a new person born, and we were seeing through her eyes. I knew would be something that would help the audience get into the experience as if it was really happening. And I love also the way like that always, what I would do if you if it were happening to me.
That's crazy. Yeah.
And speaking about violence, like, of course, I felt I was really amazed how our films have some similarities into the process of dealing with image and sound, because the sound really strike me as well in your film. And I like what you said about not showing the violence, but I felt like, to me, the way you deal with the POV, and I don't know how to call it, but the back POV, where it's no more a POV, but it's like just someone back. This brought a lot of violence. I felt like the fact that he was kind of sharing what happened without showing anything, but just having this device filming his back was so violent. Can you talk a little bit about that, how it came together?
It's funny, Coralie, because there's something, there's like a weird visual overlap that happened in my brain while you were saying that. Because if you take the idea of point of view, you know, seriously, as serious as possible, and you bring the camera into the body, I like to say, make the camera an organ, you know? And then when a really tragic thing happens in the film, you know, adult Elwood is separated from himself. The camera leaves his body. Like, I could imagine a scene like yours where it's just like coming out, and it's just this really gross, yet profoundly visceral and symbolic, yet true to life thing. I wonder for you, similar to, I mean, not even similar to me, but I think the camera is just so violent. And I think it's also so beautiful. And that tension is maybe one thing I'm trying to address with my work. If the camera is violent to you, if it's done violence, or do you kind of see it as more of a tool to sort of elevate, you know? And maybe I'll say one or two things to give you time to think about it. Because I think, you know, the way in which we see each other is so much a production of the camera and a production of the way in which people have had ideas about the world and been towing in other ideas accidentally and or intentionally, I like to call, and I say it so much, but the photography and the film, the technology of racism. Like, you know, you have this bizarre idea of racism and you need to prove it somehow because it's not true. Yeah. So if you take an image of someone doing something and you put this idea, you incept someone's head, then they can like project that onto the thing. And so if you pass that around the world and you tell people something, then like, what are they gonna think? The camera is the truest thing in the entire world. And so POV was like a way for me to address that in an almost sort of backwards way, but it's tied into the history of photography, and specifically the history of actually painting and drawing of women. Like, the way that we see women now is based on the way in which women have been idealized / exploited and oppressed across time, and the camera's so implicit, you know?
Yeah, I think it's super true. Like, the camera is the eye of the world. It's the eye of our society and the eye of our representations. I think the representations of our world has so much influence about the way we grew up, the way we think, and we are exposed to what we see, to what we watch. And I think that really builds of relationship to how we position ourselves in the world.
Yeah.
For a big part. And I would say, like, regarding the camera, to me, I really think about the camera as a way to kind of bring to life my mental craziness, like to create an experience that I'm not allowed to live in real life. You know, it's in real life you have to behave, to be normal most of the time. And I really consider the camera and the camera work as being able to project all my mental, obsessions or my mental anger or my mental fun sometimes about, going far and being excessive.
Yeah.
To be the best tool for that, together with sound. Because I think they are linked. They are very, very linked.
That's why your film feels so authored, and I wish people were taught to use cameras and images in the way in which you use them, in which they are deeply personal. Like, you have a personal aesthetic, and it's therefore not allowed to be presented as universal. It's not allowed to be objective. Like, there's nothing objective about your film, you know? Like, it is all yours, and that is I think an intervention for cinema. I think a lot of cinema sort of uses like a universal aesthetic, you know, where they're just like trying to make something beautiful, and then it just toes in so much. Yeah, I like what you said.
Yeah, I think to me it's like when I write something and when I imagine a scene, it's always about trying to find what's gonna make it me, like that.
Yeah.
You know, it's gonna be me and not something that someone else could have done or would do the same way. I'm really interested into trying to get that when I imagine what I'm gonna film. And I wanted to ask you because it's one of the scenes that impressed me a lot. Also in the way that you deal with POV is the first scene when you switch POV, when you kind of reveal that everything that we've seen from the beginning of the film, finally we see the person who was showing all that at the lunch, in the
the cafeteria scene.
Exactly, with the guy barking, and then you do the scene and like say, okay, so this is what I was seeing. Because this one I think is very powerful in the way you bring it and in the way it shapes the language of your film.
Yeah.
How did it came together and why that moment in particular?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think we scripted it as a double in the way in which we edited it. The way that it was scripted was that in that scene, Elwood sits down at the table and then he looks up and sees Turner, and then we jump to Turner, and then we see Elwood. It was always supposed to be the first reveal of Elwood's face. And then, of course, you realize that there are two point of views over the course of the film and then they can slowly intertwine, and then the other things can happen. But the boxcar footage was so powerful, and the score, the sounds that Alex Summers and Scott Alario were putting together, we felt that like the film could break open in a way, and it could actually do something that was more oniric, and something that was more surreal, and something that was more real. Because when we're with people, we all seem to agree on what's happening, but we clearly know in everyone's head something completely different is happening than what we think is happening. But for the sake of society or utility, we kind of settle on agreeance. So I think it was about that. It was about showing the multiple worlds, which reminds me of the moment in your film, and when you realize the main character is turning into a monster, and then she becomes an actual monster that's like crawling down the street, which is, I think, I went to like a midday showing, and most folks don't go to movies in the midday, so there weren't any other people there. And I was just like, can I have a witness? Can anyone, why is no one else here so I can be like, what's going on with the world? How did you get to like that? That's like such a good move, But like, how did you get, and like, what was that scene like for you?
Yeah, I think this one really came together while I was writing and getting to the final act, which I really took shape on the page. It was not really planned, before when I decided to write the movie. I didn't know exactly how it was going to end. And when
I love that so much. Like it brings me so much joy that you're like finding it while you're doing it. Yeah, sorry, I just love that. I love that. Yeah.
And yes, and I think a big turning point was the birth of the monster, which for me is like the kind of liberation of, not have to care anymore about what you look like or what people are going to think about you, because you're so past your human body that finally you can just not care. And that's also the moment where she has some tenderness for herself. It's the first moment where she doesn't care what she looks like. And it's the moment where she says, oh, okay, I'm going to put my earrings, I'm going to prep myself, and I'm going to go outside and be on stage because I deserve to be in the world. I deserve to have my place in the world and to have my moment. And that's why I think this is a genuine, to me, the more tender, genuine moments of the film is there, because she says, it's me. Like, it's me. For the first time, she sees herself as who she is, not what her body is, and not how she's going to be judged. And for the first time, she feels that these have some worth, these have some value.
Yeah.
And the final confrontation with the audience, like, makes her realize that unfortunately society is not ready to, you know, welcome that that what she thinks the way she would have hoped.
Yeah.
So to me, the final explosion and the blood splattering is really about showing the world, like, the violence that they create, the violence that, like, look at what you're doing to us. Look the way we finish on the as a stake on the pavement because of all that. But it's also some kind of liberation for the character, and the way it came together. I think it was, you know, welcoming that need for the character to find some kind of salvation, some kind of happiness in the end, which was for me to be reunited with her star, which was the symbol of who she is, who she was, and who she will be. And there is this, you know, final smile when she's looking at the sky, and you see that, okay, she made it. She had her moment, even if it's as a blob, you know, on the on the pavement.
So it's a story of redemption.
Yes. No, but it's really, to me, I really see it as much as a happy end as a tragic end, of course. But there is some form of liberation and empowerment, because in the end, she finally doesn't care what she looks like. She just feels that she matters, whatever state she's in. So, I want to ask you also about the moment where she's gonna visit him, and she's not gonna be allowed to see him, and she's gonna have this hug, which I think was such a moving and powerful moment. So, can you tell me more about this one? Also, the way it came together.
I came all this way, and I can't hug Elwood, so I guess you'll have to do. What are they feeding y'all? You can't muss up a bigger hug than that. I'm gonna remember that next time. Turn. Hug me again. What are they feeding y'all?
What a hug Hattie gives him. You know, it was a fun thing to write, because you realize that if you think about Turner, the character, like, how often has he been touched in a loving way? Like, when has he had human contact that wasn't in a boxing ring or wasn't, you know, roughhousing with the guys? And, you know, the idea of love is core, Jocelyn and I believe, to the Nickel Boys narrative that Colson wrote. And Hattie is full with it and gave so much to Elwood, but yet Elwood is gone. So she comes to give it to him, and he's not there. And it's such a beautiful moment, because you see Aunjanue, I would say it seems like at her best, so she's just an island out there, kind of half speaking, half looking around, like genuinely in awe that her son's in this reform school and she can't see him. And the only thing that she can think of doing is giving the love that she wanted to give to Elwood to this other man, which is it's almost tear-jerking, because like Nickel Boys is based on the Dozier School for Boys in Florida, a reform school in which they started to exhume bodies from the ground in 2013. It closed in 2011. Like, this is real life. Boys as young as 6, 5 that were sent there that like just disappeared. They ran away, they would say. And so giving point of view, giving like the camera to them, to the inside of their bodies, was a way to give them life, like give them what was taken from them, and really deeply thinking about what it would mean to be in a space like that and to look and to not have love. I think is how we came to that moment. And Aunjanue just does, like, it's so unbelievable. Everyone on set, I think, is like looking around, wondering if it's real life, you know, because Aunjanue tends to come out in character, and then sort of steps away in character, and it's not, everything's a oneer, you know, like, so there's no cuts. We run every scene for the entire thing because it's single point perspective. Yeah, what a beautiful moment. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, and to me, I felt it was all the more powerful to be able to create that emotion that you only see her. As you say, it's a whole point of view, but you feel the exchange without showing at all the other person, which is super, super powerful.
Well, there's something really fascinating that happened, and we realized later, and through some of the Q&As, one woman said, I've typically seen love depicted in Black households on film as discipline, in which you're like, don't stay out late, don't do this, like, this is bad, this is good. And you see them hug, and we're sort of like, of course, on the outside looking in. But she said for the first time, through Hattie's gaze, through the camera into the audience, who is the character, she got to see the way that she looks at her loved ones and the way that she's been looked at inside the Black family household, which seems to be an opening up of kind of the inner subjectivity of love between people. She also said the film is a Black mother's nightmare. So there was a darker side.
And just on a technical point of view, like when you're filming this kind of scene, which is so emotional and so intense, how, for the actor, you know, because it's your DP who is holding the camera at that time, and the other actor is behind. How do you set up this so there is still an exchange between the two of them? And is it challenging for the actors to navigate the technical, you know, setup?
Yeah, I think it was pretty challenging for the actors, and we didn't tell them too much because we didn't want to overburden them with the concepts of the film. But there are 4 camera systems that we used, and one of them is camera operator, and in this case it was Sam Ellison with Turner Brandon right behind him, and, like, you know, kind of almost being a puppet with his arms. And then, you know, Jomo and I, you know, spent many a day practicing the hug with a DSLR, like, in his Airbnb. And so he's kind of going through that movement. But it is interesting because the camera operator becomes the character and kind of needs to be emotionally responsive.
Yeah.
And what a strange thing, you know, to be integrated in the scene in which you're basically responsible, you know, to be emotionally present and not just a voyeur. Also, Fred Hetchinger said something really fascinating, which was that when he's making a movie, he's very conscious of the camera and trying to ignore it. And so he's in the scene with the people, and, like, of course, you know, the camera's there. But in this case, he'd never been more aware of being looked at because he has to look in the camera. So he's aware of the gaze of the audience, which is just like a weird psychological...
I think that's also what makes it very powerful in what she expressed in that scene. There is such an intensity, and the device, I think, is very... Yeah, I'm asking this question because I know that for Demi, when we had to look into the camera, it was challenging at first because you don't have another actor that you can look into. But in the end, I agree with you. I think it creates something very powerful in being aware that you're looked at, and it's kind of a special relationship with the audience. And it's this scene in your film, I think it was like really giving goosebumps.
Thank you.
I'm so happy we got to talk together and getting to know more about your creative process, because I loved your film, so that was super interesting, and thank you for this.
Coralie, it was really nice to meet you. Maybe it was nicer for me to meet you than for you to meet me, but that's not fair.
You don't know that.
No, I love substance, and very few films I can't forget, though I do remember. and your film, it's definitely like in my bones, and it makes me want to be nicer to myself.
That's a great thing to hear. Thank you so much.
Nice chatting with you.